Guys, you're very warm welcome to the very first Alumni Meetup in Singapore. I'm super excited. Like seeing new faces. Thank you so much for coming over.
Aaron's coming?
Aaron?
Aaron's not in the call?
No, right? Today, we're gonna kick it off with a little fireside talk and presentation with Webster Tai, who's a UX expert and innovation expert who is from Singapore, but is joining us all the way from Qatar. Has a little presentation to show lessons learned from his career, and we can basically ask him anything. Then we have a very short section of shout outs. So if you have anything worth sharing, opportunities, things that the community should know about, it's the moment. And then we go back to food and drinks, which is the best part of the meetup. And that's about it. So yeah, without further ado, I would like to give it over to Webster, who's been very kind to join us today and just share his learnings and present it. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone.
Whenever you want, Webster, you feel free to share.
Perfect.
Or you want to kick this off. I hope that you can see the group of people that is looking at you through on one of the.
Looks like it's more than 8 people.
No,
I count exactly 8 people.
Well, very nice to see everyone. Just let me get my screen in place. You guys can see the screen, yeah?
Yeah, we're all in front of a big screen. It's all good.
So yeah, thank you, Miguel. Thank you, Asliana, for organizing this. Really, I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to share, my experiences as a designer with everyone in the room. So we'll start. So I put together a quick kind of a little deck to kind of capture what I want to share with you today. So it'll be about 30-35 minutes. So if you guys got anything in the middle, just raise your hand, just let me know.
Webster, one thing, I cannot see the presentation. I don't know if other people that are not in that room can actually see the presentation.
Attention, your attention please. The building emergency condition.
I think Webster didn't start sharing it yet. I think it's all good. There we go.
Yeah. Thanks.
Perfect. All good. You can see the screen. Hello from Qatar.
Yep.
Okay. So we start. So first off, yeah, I'm very grateful again, as I said, but I thought I'd start by kind of sharing a little bit about Qatar. Because like myself as a Singaporean coming to Qatar 5 years ago, I knew very little about it. So I would imagine everyone in the room may not really know about Middle East or in the Gulf. So quick introduction about where I am before I go about me. So yeah, so interestingly, I work in the country that owns a football club. And I work in a company that sponsors that football club. So below number 10, Neymar's jersey there, it's Ooredoo, and that's the telco that I work in today. It's Qatari owned, and it's pretty much purchased by like the GIC of Qatar. So I've been here for the past 5 years, and I still remember the day that I decided to move to Qatar back in 2015, right? And knowing very little about it, I just told my mom, hey, Mom, moving to Middle East, I'm going to Qatar. And then the first thing that she kind of blurted out was like, hey, go there safe or not? So she was, it was very little information about it, but yeah, but soon after arriving, right, all these assumptions and all that thoughts in your mind just kind of gets removed, right? So as you know, Doha is the capital of Qatar, and it's a before after of the city. 1982 on top, that's pretty much like the transformation over the last 30+ years, and that's kind of like the City Hall Raffles Place. and somewhere in there is where I work. But as I shared earlier today, it's not a working day in this part of the world here. Friday and Saturday is the weekend, so I'm at home right now. So my hood, where I'm calling from, interesting, it's a really cool place called the Pearl. So it's artificial land, something like Marina Bay, kind of. And then the bottom left is where I'm calling from, in a little apartment over there. So yeah, coming from a Singapore, growing up here, moving to the Middle East, you know, probably one of the richest countries of the world. You know, you're growing up, you have like a 7-Eleven downstairs, you know, go to void deck, go hang out, go to kopitiam. But I still remember, and my friend here is on the call, when I visited him, Erwin, and he said he was hosting dinner, and he said, come, I'm staying in the Ferrari tower. And I'm like, wow, it's very cliche, like who stays in a tower called Ferrari? He said, no, we have a showroom downstairs. It's a Ferrari showroom, and I stay above it. So this is opposite, it's a Rolls Royce showroom. So it was pretty much like a culture shock when we moved here. But you know, as you go along, you kind of understand how the culture works. But you know, with the country that really loves its football, yeah, and sometime, yeah, winter next year. So almost January of 2023, actually, that would be the World Cup final. So at end of next year would be the FIFA World Cup, right? And then you get to see the whole transformation of the country taking place before my eyes. So I played football in places that now it's actually a stadium. So that's kind of like what Qatar is, right? So anyhow, it's not really about me. It's about Qatar, but more about me here today. Is to share my kind of experiences as being a multidisciplinary designer for as long as I know. So I'm a product of Temasek Poly here. So I don't know anyone on the call in the room is from Temasek Poly. Oh, cool. I'm from design school, visual communication. If anyone's from there. So, oh, that's cool. Hello.
Of course.
That's really nice. So I'm a graphic designer by training, and then I moved on to kind of go broader into that space. Moved into working as an in-house creative abroad. I worked in a consultancy called IDEO, which kind of coined design thinking some years ago. Did a tech startup when I moved to Qatar, which we'll talk about a little bit. And yeah, here I am today working in like the Singtel of Qatar in a corporate. So I guess to share with you this whole session, it's about framing it as such, right? So 5 things I've learned, you know, working in 5 types of design jobs, so any job for that matter, right? So let's get into it. Yeah, so the first learning, it's about, you know, finding a process, you know, finding a way to work pretty much, right? As a designer, as a developer. But, you know, even as an artist, there's always a process. There's a way to go about it, right? You learn how to draw, how to paint, you know, the different types of canvases. It's the same thing. But something that pretty much ingrained in me. So whether or not you might be a project manager, product owner, designer, coder, developer, I believe we are all problem solvers, right? So we're here to solve a problem, and there is a way to do it. So I always stick by this, right? So I always say that artists, right, tend to build things, create things that represents themselves, right? It's for themselves. As designers, we are trained to solve problems, right? Not for ourselves, but for other people, for others. So that's the first thing there. So really, how do we want to go about it? And that's design thinking, right? It's a mindset. So enter the famous Venn diagram of the DVF. So just to share a little bit about what design thinking is in a very simple way. You know, it's about the 3 different components of design thinking. If you put them all together, you will get something great. So the first thing is always about whether or not whatever you're doing will it be making money, right? So that's all your Excel sheets, your business planning, etc. Feasibility would be whether you can build it or not, you know, whether you can do your tech in 5G, HTML5, HTML6, who knows? And last of all, it's about knowing who you're going to do it for and whether or not they want it. And from my experience, most organizations or clients, they're mainly about making money with whatever they can, right? Let me launch an app and see how much money we can make, how many users can we get. But design thinking is really, you know, entering that sweet spot about that, plus, you know, that desirability component of knowing what your customers or what your users want, right? So it starts there, and then you go about problem solving. So on a high level, it's about design thinking. For me, as a designer, it's about understanding the desirability of the users. It starts with people. And what you do with it, you conduct user research, right? And with the user research, asking the right questions, gather insights, you would define that user experience. And that's also known as UX. So some interaction here. So how many of you guys know this movie? I mean, raise of hands, and those that are on Zoom, you know, there's a button there for you to kind of put your hand up so we can kind of see what do you guys think about this. A few people there. Great. So for me, for those who have not seen the movie, so that's its founder, as you can see, it's McDonald's. So it's kind of the early days of McDonald's, and it's something that really resonates with me in terms of problem solving. And I have a little clip there that kind of captures that moment of design thinking there that you can talk. I want to show it to you. So I hope it plays.
He wanted something different, and that's when my brother here comes up with one of his brilliant ideas. Tell him, Dick. Order's ready in 30 seconds, not 30 minutes. And you were gonna love how we did it, Dick. You gotta tell him. The tennis court? Okay, he brings me out to this tennis court, and he's drawn this line, the exact dimensions of our kitchen.
Sink on the right, extruder on the left.
Okay. And Dick is running around with this stick, marking where all the equipment should be.
Tuck in. Tony, are you gonna skip the pickles when we're really doing it? Yes. No. Catch up! Use the lazy Susan. And pickles, and pickle, and mustard!
The Speed D system is born, and it's off to the races. And we are an overnight sensation 30 years in the making.
So yeah, the Speedy system. So that was invented in the late 1940s. And it's always about, and that was about producing hamburgers in 30 seconds there. So it's a great example of design thinking. So to get into it, right? So you have the different components of design thinking at play, right? The first thing is definitely as business owners, as a restaurant, if I can sell more burgers per day, I get more revenue, right? So it's all about kind of exploiting that commercial possibility. And then in your kitchen, in the feasibility side, that would be about how, with whatever kitchen equipment available to me at the time, can we produce a burger in 30 seconds, right? And then last of all, it's about, you know, what the customers want. Because back then, McDonald's and all the burger joints were serving their burger meals, which takes a few minutes, longer than usual. And then you have a lady in roller skate kind of serve it to you in your car. And so it was a very different experience then. So for me, this is very good here to share with you about kind of what design thinking is all about. So as a first learning, right, that process that we talk about is pretty much just to trust in that process, right? Stay grounded, apply design thinking, you know, that way it's cool, right? And that's what the Mandalorian would say, right? So that's the way. Moving on. 1 second, I lost the video of everyone. Let me see if I can pull you back here. You guys can still hear me, yeah?
Yep.
Okay, let's move on. Learning number two, 0 to 1, not 0 to 100. So it's about starting on the right foot, right? With design thinking, it's a mindset. Let's talk a little bit about, the approach in terms of how you can engage with design thinking. So we go back to that tennis court, right? So back then, when you want to produce a new restaurant, instead of buying all that kitchen equipment, renting that space, and having all your operational costs, a tennis court here in this instance would be your mock-up, your prototype, right? Testing whether, asking the question to say, can I produce, or what's the best way to produce my hamburger in 30 seconds, right? And that's your kind of your value proposition and KPI. So let's talk about that and how you go about to apply this. So enter the design sprint. So how familiar is everyone with design sprints? I lost the...
Yeah, we know. We speak your language.
I see you. Okay, great, you guys. So for those who don't know, it's about, to me, it's a toolkit, right? Design sprints, it's going from an idea or a challenge and taking that forward into a high fidelity prototype, right? Front end. And in fact, very little coding at this point. So, on the right, here's an example of a prototype that we did here in Qatar about how somebody can use a digital channel to purchase a SIM card. So identifying who your different customers are. Design sprints is about, as I said, getting tangible fast. So getting an idea and putting something forward and turning something very abstract into something concrete, right? And it's also something that you can use to bring people together. And then in the room, you typically need to have people from different aspects of the design of your solution, your customer, your developer, of course, and the designer, and so on, right? And it's about getting it to the market first, fast, getting it out there, 0 to 1, and then you keep iterating. So some insights there. With the new normal here, we do design sprints and we do that in a virtual setting. And for those who don't know, Mural and Miro are digital whiteboards that you can use. It's a Zoom call here that we did. And with prototyping, it starts with just really raw sketches, just kind of capturing your ideas and letting people kind of discuss by voting to see whether that has any legs to take forward, right? So in that whole prototyping phase, what you do with it is to put it in front of your customers here. So how you're gonna do your prototyping would be about asking the right questions, testing the UX, UI of the components, and to really understand where you are at, right? Before you even go ahead and invest a lot of resources to kind of build that whole solution out. So interestingly, if you see the third design screenshot there, is a guy with an arm right there. And this was very interesting because this guy was doing a user test with us over Zoom, and he was in a car and we had to tell him to park his car because we couldn't meet together, and he was driving. And in fact, something interesting as well was that he was a very unhappy customer, because no point talking to customers who are already happy because they don't really have any problems. So learning about that really gets you the right insights to how do you take the first steps to move forward. So we did capture about design thinking, right? And what I like to call design thinking is like your cooking class. So if you want to learn how to cook, and then you learn about the different fundamentals of philosophy. So Gordon Ramsay would say, make sure you have sharp knives and clean workspace, right? So that's getting everything right, the mindsets. And when it comes to design sprints, that for me is the cookbook, right? You get your recipe, because if it's with the design sprints, it's step-by-step guide for you to take through, just like cooking anything you want, right? So as an outcome with the design sprint, you really get a dish and a prototype so that you can actually put it in front of your customers who really want to test and let you know what they think about it, right? But something to share with you as well is that dish that you produce doesn't really qualify as a meal, right? And that meal is a whole complete experience. The meal would be served in a restaurant, and restaurant is a business there. So that design sprint and that prototype doesn't mean that, hey, I've got everything done. I can go start my bubble tea business, my chicken rice store. So as a summary for the second learning, it's about, taking the right first steps, prototyping to test, and then making sure that it's always an iterative process. So next, it's about people now, right? Mindset with hands, and now who you're going to use design thinking or problem solving with. So I'm going to share with you some insights about, how you apply it in Qatar, actually. So, when I first moved here, there was I did some consulting work, and there was a entrepreneur that wanted to build like the Etsy of Qatar. So Etsy is like a handicraft marketplace that you can put your handmade products there for people to buy. So it's the Middle East, how you can do it. So you start with the business owners. So interestingly, yeah. So I found, I grabbed one of the team members from the company and said, I don't speak Arabic. I need to speak to your Arabic business owners, right? So we went to a market and we speak to business owners. And here is one of my favorite photos of all time. I spoke to a grandma in a whole abaya, no English, nothing. So with the my buddy, a translator there, he explained that, the business owners here, it's pretty much this profile, right? And it's something that they do as a hobby business. And then you can think about how you can serve that needs. Because if you really want to say, hey, I'm going to build an Etsy of Qatar or Etsy of Singapore, you can't really replicate that whole solution wholesale, because that would serve a very different set of customers, right? So if your solution would be very tech savvy, and if your customers or your main users are like this lady here, then that you got to think about how do you approach that, and then let's talk about a little bit my startup that I did. It's no longer operational, but it was a P2P delivery platform. So peer-to-peer, meaning to say that it's kind of like your Uber platform, where you have your one side your driver and the other side your customer, right? Kind of like a Grab. So we wanted to do that. We started that in Qatar because there was a lot of opportunity there, because people always needed something done, different tasks out there. So the starting point here would be to understand that in a peer-to-peer model, you have two types of users, right? On one side, the first P will be your drivers, your limousine drivers. So how do you build empathy with them? You ask the right questions, you kind of shadow their work and life, and see how you can possibly fit into their world, right? So you shouldn't really assume to say, I'm going to build a Uber type business, right? Because we spoke to a lot of limousine drivers, taxi drivers in the country. And one time, one of the driver came out and I asked him to show me his phone. And it was a smart feature phone. It was a 2G phone, right? Those little Nokia phones that you have. And he doesn't even own a smartphone. So if you're going to design something, understand their world first, right? So I'm not saying that every driver here has a smartphone. There are more drivers here that has a more fancy phone than me. I have an iPhone X. I've seen limousine drivers have iPhone 12, and I really don't know how. So that's really one side to think about. And then in the other side, you have your customers, right? So it's about kind of meeting them, understanding them, setting up that interaction, right, as your solution. And something very interesting here is that when I was prototyping and building that value proposition, I didn't build any app at that time. And the app that I was using was really WhatsApp, right? If you can use WhatsApp to solve your problem, that would be an international language and a platform that most people already have, right? So with WhatsApp, you kind of say, hey, maybe we can do a grocery run to serve some customers in this group here to do a trial. Or if not, let's bring them some sandwiches. So what's that whole interaction and kind of features that we would need to define what that product roadmap would be. So apart from building a startup, so I've spoken to a very rich Qatari, a very wealthy man who also came and said, hey, I'm going to build a shopping mall. In fact, I'm already building it just outside Doha. And up came the question to say, okay, what kind of mall are you going to build, right? There's so many malls in Qatar, because, in the summer, it's hot. People typically typically like to go out and they go into an air-conditioned space. So something like Singapore, right? So then the client went to say, go find out, right? So, and time was very limited. So how you can do your user research and speak to them, gathering that data, it's not from you to kind of prescribe and say, I know what kind of mall to build, but rather to kind of say, I will find out what the people want, right? So here's an example there. So it's about kind of asking the questions to the public in Qatar. So I went to Facebook, made a post over a weekend, and then just within a day, it got over 100 engagements from 100 different people living in Qatar, like kind of asking them what kind of mall, right? So bringing that data in a day is a starting point that you can, of course, evaluate later on with the whole business model that you have. So it doesn't need to be, you know, something very formal that you need to hire a big agency or an expert there to do all your ground research. You can do it yourself, and with the tools that are available to you, it's kind of thinking out of the box and kind of getting your solutions there. So my third learning to share with you would be, you know, don't be that solution, that idea, and then you go around saying, hey, you have a problem, I have this. Hey, you have a problem. So I always relate this to your typical perfume salesman, right? Going around with the bottle and say, hey, you want to buy something that smells good? Do you smell bad? Do you smell bad? You know, don't be that person, right? Start with that problem and move forward from there. Next, evolve with the times. So for me, this topic here to share with you is it's about technology a little bit, you know, and I said that, you know, technology will make a lot of things, a lot of people become like dinosaurs. And don't become that dinosaur, right? Don't become that T-Rex trying to get your customers or kind of get what you want. Here you have that barrier, and that would be that kind of technological layer, like how come I cannot connect with them? You know, so evolve with the times. So with the times, you have Straits Times, right? So as an example, you have newspapers used to be all printed. It moved on to a website that you can, you know, subscribe, and then soon it became available across different interfaces like your mobile phone, iPads, etc. Right? So, but that really doesn't end there, right? So look what's happening, right? So in your print media, if you don't evolve and keep up, you know, you become a dinosaur, right? And you don't want that. So how you can do it is always to understand what's out there. So I got an example to share with you. So recently there was a clip here. Not going to play the clip, but what kind of interface what happened was, you know, Obama had a nice interview with Oprah. Rather, Oprah had an interview with Obama, and it really looked like a very nice setting, and the fireplace looked like it's the residence of where Obama lives. But it turns out that at the end of it, it was, you know, shared that it was all filmed behind a green screen, and they call it the holographic kind of tech to kind of project this out. So kind of for you as a user watching this content, you know, that's the interface, but the whole technological layer happening in the background has evolved so much, right? So that whole interface is what we call AR, augmented reality, and that's something like your Pokemon Go. So what I'm saying is that, you know, your interface would have been print, you know, some years ago, would have evolved into a screen. And what next, right? The future will be things like this. So do you guys know what this is? This is? That's yeah, that's a Google Glass, right? So it's no longer having that screen on your typical phone, or now even your watch, right? It's on your eye. So tomorrow's interface is really not on a mobile app. So how do you design and keep up and stick with that? So there's something to take note. But you know that Google Glass doesn't end there. So something that was, you know, very widely circulated in the Consumer Electronics show just earlier this January was a smart contact lens, right? So it's no longer about figuring out what's on the screen, but the future is really having a projector in your eye to kind of learn how to kind of interact with it. So as designers, as people that produce solutions, right? Think about how the technology that you you are using today, right? You're using Java, Python, HTML5. Who knows? This will evolve a lot. Tomorrow it might be redundant. So the point here is that with new tech, which will come out every day, it will always open up new interfaces and unlock whole new possibilities for what's out there in the market. So the learning number 4 would be, keep up, right? So stay connected and don't become a dinosaur. Now, my last learning would be about working with others. So for me, it's about having worked with really a lot of different people, different teams and organizations over the years. And it's about knowing where you work in, what kind of environment, what kind of culture you're in, and who are the people that are with you to produce what you're trying to produce, right? So I'll talk to you a little bit about how you or myself as an individual interact with the customers, because at the end of the day, how the customers behave and react to what you're doing kind of pays your salary, right? So starting off was working freelance, right? So that was very transactional. And to be honest, most of the work that I did freelance didn't really have much interactions with the customers. So your main interactions would be with the client, and then you either work with the developer or the client is a developer that helps you to produce the work. So as a freelancer, as a designer, most of the work then was really quite distant from the customer, and it's more transactional. Then when I was working in-house, right, in a kind of a full production mode as an in-house creative, you have your developers on one side, sales and marketing on one side, and you have the business unit there. And it's kind of like being on a boat that you are building that solution, you're casting your line out to fish for your customers. So it was more about, producing as much work as possible, as fast as you can, and then go kind of see that reaction from that customer. So it's a different environment. And then being in a consultant, here you have your client who would struggle, and they acknowledge that they need to understand how customers behave and kind of give them some insight. So you're kind of providing the answers for the clients by asking the customers on the client's behalf, right? And then you work with your developer there to kind of propose a solution to move forward, and it moves up to the management. And then in the startup space, it's the customer is the boss, right? So you are just in your very small environment, and you're figuring out your value proposition. So you got to be very confident with what you're doing and know exactly who you're trying to speak with, and kind of validate whether these features would actually make sense for your business or not. So it's very high stakes, because any wrong move could kind of pivot you, and sometimes it doesn't really end well. And the last kind of environment would be working in a corporate, like where I am in a telco, right? So you have so many different teams, and you're kind of also the design consultant almost, because the customer is still pretty much outside. It's like a different island from you, but you have your different departments, and you have all this corporate bingo that you have to go through, your RFPs, NDAs, and connecting with the APIs. And typically the developer that we work with, it's quite far away as well. They sit in a different department in the technology team, and working together, it is pretty much a challenge. So every Zoom call has a lot of people, and you get to a lot of meetings that you've been kidnapped. So we call it the meet nap. So you're going to a meeting and you're sleeping there because you're taking a nap in that meeting. But producing the work sometimes doesn't end there with all these people. So sometimes, especially where I'm at, you have top management that comes out and it's like, okay, they want this right now, priority 0, and you stop all your work. And sometimes you even have the board that comes in. And there was instances that I've experienced where even the chairman can come in to kind of be that stakeholder for you to decide, to kind of determine what you should be doing. So at the end, what I'm saying is that, be aware that you will not be working alone, right? So collaborate with one another. So know each other's role, not just within your team as your product or as a digital team, but understand your environment and know that find a way how you can connect with your customers. because they always say, yeah, you never work alone. So to summarize those 5 learnings, so we have design thinking as a process, as a mindset to equip you to problem solving, using the toolkit to use design sprints, starting on the right foot. And of course, knowing who you're designing for is very important. Don't become a dinosaur. And lastly, collaborate, right? So that's the share I have for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Webster. Thank you. Really, very strong appreciation from our side for taking the time to prepare this and sharing all this with you. I'd love to open up for questions. To our alumni, I'm just going to open up first for the people who are live, and then I'll pick it up for people who are posting questions in the chat. Any questions that you have, guys? I'm just gonna put the microphone a little bit closer, turn up the gain. It's capturing, yeah. Come on.
No, I'm trying to frame my question.
Okay.
Like, so for your, I was very intrigued by one of your, can you hear me?
Yep.
I was very intrigued by one of your research methodologies for your work. Can I, like, what is your process when you're coming up with questions? Because you did say, like, ask the right question. So, like, it's very, like, subjective. So, like, how do you ask the right questions, or how do you, like, frame them for your research? You know what I mean? Like, is it the number of questions, the issues, or do you, like, kind of already have a few people on hand to interview or have like the completing or qualitative research? Like, what is your process? Yeah.
Cool. So good question. Very good question, in fact. So it's very challenging to really do user research, and it's also sometimes very intimidating to speak to users. So I mean, to start is that you don't want to end up like having 5 people doing like a board interview with one candidate there. So to set up that interview, there are a lot of components that you need to be considerate of, right? So one is that you need to understand why that person would want to talk to you. So how do you incentivize that person to say, okay, I'll give you some of my time. What are you going to give me in return? So you got to give them, Starbucks gift card, right? Go give them some data, if you're in telco. So they'll be like, okay, there is something there. I will tell you exactly what I think, without, filtering anything. Because a lot of times, if you don't set that whole meeting or research interview with them, they would just give you the answers that you are looking for. And you don't want to set questions which are binary, which would be like yes, no, and then that's like a survey. So how you set up your questions should be always in a very open-ended way. Like for example, if I'm building my delivery app, or for example, how somebody would buy a SIM card online, which is one of the design sprints that we did relatively recently, would be, how you ask questions like, how do you buy a SIM card? When you travel overseas, where are the places do you go? So these kind of questions, the who, what, when, where questions, would always help you as a guide in terms of structuring that question so that you can kind of listen to the insights. And the next layer there would be going into the why. So there's always this saying about, how many was it? 5 why. So every response that the person gives to you, like, oh, I will go to the shop to buy my SIM card. And then you ask why. And then they will just respond, oh, I go to the shop because there's a shop downstairs. And then you can note with that insight that it's convenience, right? They will never say it's convenient, but it's about listening to kind of what they're looking for, and helping them to understand what you're trying to get at. So you got to make your kind of your client, your user, they feel comfortable, right? Tell them there's no right or wrong answer. It's open-ended, right? And know that when you do that user interview, try not to do it alone, because you would never capture everything. Go with the buddy, and make sure that buddy has a role to do time taking, so you don't end up talking for hours. and also take notes. And you as the interviewer just focus on asking the questions and seeing that body language, right? So I hope that answers your questions. Yeah, go for it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Returning to your Venn diagram, right? What's your view if you are actually designing a product that's for internal consumption within the organization? So would you say that maybe you can deprioritize design? I mean, that's a bit of a unique question. Just wanted to know your views. I guess in this case, the end customer, because the internal tool could be an internal stakeholder.
So if I'm understanding you correct, it's about, how do you apply that design thinking based on that situation you're in?
Yes.
So
Like, changes or things that you still keep with the same process.
sorry, I didn't get that. Could you come a little bit closer?
Still keep with the same process, or
Yeah.
something change because it's kind of not an end customer, like
Okay, so for me, what I would do is kind of understand the nature of the project, right? And also the environment you're in, as what I said, like understanding which organization you're in. Is that solution based on a commercial strategy, right? Am I building this so that I can gain a bigger ARPU, right? More, can every user spend a little bit more for me? So you got to frame that based on the client needs. So your product owner, who you're designing for. If you're designing for a business unit, the commercial unit will only think about dollars and cents. So you need to be able to connect with what that person is looking for, to say, look, your solution is going to increase my revenue targets by $200,000. Perfect. Everything will be driven from there. And then as a designer, as a developer, then it's your role to retrofit and to make sure whatever you're doing to promise to get that X amount of money needs to make sense, right? Because you're kind of the solution provider. So you kind of need to integrate that. You're not trying to say, I would solve your problem by design thinking, right? It's that mindset and that approach to kind of respond to how you're going to build that solution. If that makes sense. Go for it, Daphne. Yeah, if you can come closer to the mic, you'll be a little bit better.
Hello?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So referring back to your slide just now, or your example about building or a user testing for a client who is or customer that's not happy. I thought it's interesting because you said that you want to focus more on an upset client and how you manage to get the person's time to go through something when it's not a complete product. So I'm sure over here also, like software developers or product managers, sometimes they also get the opportunity to meet upset clients because they want to hear their needs. So do you have a generic kind of recommendation on how to go about putting away like the customer's upsetness or angerness and fixing the problem? Does that make sense?
So your question is about how do you deal with your kind of your extreme users, right? So you want to look at customers because you're not, because in user interviews, you can't interview 100 people. It's not scalable, it's not practical. You're in a small team, you have limited resources, and you need to go find a way to gather that qualitative data and insights, right? So ideally, if you can speak to that 3 to 5, usually 5 users would be your kind of the golden number there, especially to validate a solution. How I would frame that would be always around finding out who's that persona, right? So you have a persona exercise to kind of define who you're looking for, and then finding out if there is that person should exist or not. So that angry customer that we spoke to then was requesting for his home broadband, but for some reason his home broadband request took ages to complete. So we called him up. Not me, because I didn't speak in his language. You need to connect with that person on a very human level and said, I'm here. you empathize with that person and say, I know you have your problem. You need internet. I'm calling you because I want to help you find a way to solve it, right? So I just want to listen to see how I can help you solve it. So do you have, 10 minutes tomorrow, 15 minutes? I mean, the longer the better. Usually they're very impatient, very sensitive. So you want to tread quite carefully in terms of finding the right moment, making them feel comfortable to have that interview. Hope that answers your question.
Great, great, great. I'm going to see what questions we have in the chat. So we have an interesting question on the chat saying, Steve Jobs once said that customers don't know what they want. How can we truly determine desirability? Also, we see Singaporeans queuing and waiting over 30 minutes and 30 hours for burgers. Do we change every time desirability changes, or what do we do? What do you think about that?
I would say, first of all, not every one of us. So it's like a Steve Jobs person would be kind of a rare commodity, right? It's not everybody would aspire to be like Steve Jobs, but we're not Steve Jobs, right? So to understand that, yes, you need to be in that trend, in that groove here. So in Qatar over here, for example, I have some friends here who love their bubble tea back home, and they're opening bubble tea businesses here. And interestingly, they haven't really did that whole user interview aspect. It's just that, oh, when I travel, I miss bubble tea. I want to do bubble tea. And soon enough, that whole cultural shift happens because, people like sweet drinks here. And then you're trying to catch that wave to say that that's the next big thing. It's going to be trendy, right? And things get trendy very fast, and things die out very fast here in the Middle East, here in Qatar, because it's really an open market. It's like what we call like the Wild West. So in terms of kind of framing that desirability, you kind of, for me, kind of trust your gut, right? Have a certain baseline to say, I'm deciding to open a bubble tea business because of A, B, C, D, and stick with those guns. And make sure that the mindset is always there to say that if by X amount of time or after I burn my runway of, let's say, $10,000, and if I don't hit this milestone, I need to be real and cut my losses early instead of digging deeper and deeper. So that's how I would approach it.
I have one last question, if I may, Webster.
Yeah, sure.
So you were mentioning the importance of evolving with the times, but at the same time, whenever you listen to things around design thinking, you go about design sprint, you talk about personas, you talk about stuff that has been around for good 15 years, right? So what are some of the tools, methodologies, frameworks that you're most excited about that are new, that if you were into UX research and strategy, you would be completely spending your time on right now?
Good question. And in fact, for me, where I'm at, buzzword I want to kind of cultivate where I'm at being in a corporate environment. It's about entrepreneurship, right? So how can you think like an entrepreneur in your company, right? Instead of you working in your company and have a side hustle, moonlight outside. So for me, it's about having a entrepreneurial mindset in whatever you do. I mean, if you are a startup founder, you work in a startup, that's a prerequisite. If you don't have that mindset, that startup typically will suffer later on, right? Because it's always a small resource and you need that mindset. So for me, it's about having that entrepreneurial mind, because you always think about the reality of having a runway to kind of make some revenue, but also think about what the users want, right? And not stick to your guns and say, I'm a very good graphic designer, I'm a very good coder, I can produce an app faster than anybody else, but you need to be able to consider all the different environments. So that kind of focus for me would be entrepreneurship.
Building on that, any advice for people who want to be entrepreneurs overseas like you?
Come again?
Any advice for people who want to be entrepreneurs overseas like you? There's somebody asking, yeah.
Yeah, for me, yeah. So I'm an arts person, I'm a creative person. So maths was never my strong. I think people can resonate with it. So what I did a couple years back was, I saved some money and I looked out there and I did a MBA program. So not something that is, $70,000, but I didn't want to do it to kind of get that accreditation, but I took up a program online. So it's an online MBA. So if you want to check out, the program's called Quantic, and it's like Duolingo, but instead of learning a new language, you're learning business. And it covers things like accounting, kind of even the new topics they introduce would be things like blockchain, and knowing how the different kind of lingos of how to build a business plan and business model would be done. Because those things are very fundamental, and these things hardly change. So I would recommend you think about, after going through learning how to code, think about the business side. So an MBA program, there's a lot of resources out there. You can just Google a free MBA and you can learn those stuff. It's just about committing to it.
Thank you very much. I think that's going to close the Q&A. Thank you very much, Webster. I hope we can have you soon.
Good job.
Great content, great presentation, and very insightful answers. Thank you very much for coming and being with us here today. Are you planning to come to Singapore anytime soon? We owe you a beer at least.
I'm hoping to 拜年 to my family, but I have like 2 weeks of annual leave, but I would have to spend the quarantine of 2 weeks, and I have to fly back if I do that. So until that's fixed. Yeah. What? I graduated 2004, I think, from TP. So the rock stars, my classmates then who are still designers would be people like Tian Yu, TY, who has Acre, his studio, Jerry Go, who created Hire in his magazine.
Were you with PJ at the time?
Come again?
Were you with PJ at the time?
I'm not familiar who that is.
It's cool.
Yeah, I think Chi Young was my lecturer as well, doing photography. I think he's still doing it as well.
Who?
Young. Pon Sun Kin as well.
Nice. Cool. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to take the screen for a second just to have a round of shout outs. If any to share. No, I'm not sharing my screen, so that's very well. If anybody has anything to share, anything cool worth learning, anything that you're building, you need people, any job opportunity that you want to put out into the community, this is the moment. If there's anything that you think is worth sharing, that you can share in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, this is the time. This is the time to do it. Whether you're online, whether you're live, anything that you want to say. I'll attend to the chat. If somebody has something to share, just jump your microphone and just share it aloud with everybody. That's fine. I know. That's what a shout out. That's what a shout out is. While you think about it, I have a shout out. So I don't know if you know Julian, or if anybody on the other side of the line knows Julian. He's a graduate and he's a design thinking expert. So after going back and forth, we're gonna facilitate a workshop together on how to improve the Wagon experience. So we want alumni to come to get involved and to give their feedback and how we can make what we're doing even better. So the next people come that are at a higher bar. So we've been going back and forth. We have an agenda. We'll probably think of a date for next week if we cannot make it the next week. But reach out to me if you're interested, if you want to participate, let me know. It would be great to have a mix of people. We have people who are very technical, people who are more designy, people who are more entrepreneurial. So we get a good balance. So that's one thing. And I have another shout out for Prima. Prima is building something. Prima, you want to talk about what you're building? Are you recruiting?
All right, Prima here. I'm pretty sure if you're from Singapore, you know me. I'm from Bali too. So I've been tinkering a lot of things with Miguel. I was just thinking about like how can we help our alumni get jobs after the boot camp. So I think like when I did some research, one of the top, we tried all of things, right? We tried everything and make sure that it sticks. One of the main things we tried interviews, mock interview questions, and all of that, right? So at the end of it, we realized that there's not high values. The best values to show employers is portfolios. So I think that maybe we should do some workshop exercises on to create portfolios. So I've been working with some of the alumni here to create nursing rooms applications, right? I have a lot of like projects in mind, right? That has been stopped eons ago because baby happens and then and teaching happens, right? So we're probably thinking of doing more and more of this in the future. So if you have ideas in mind, like it might not just be my ideas, right? It could be your ideas, right? You want to build it for a long time, and you're not, like you don't have time for that. You don't think you cannot do it alone. Feel free to come here, right, to office or remote, right, whichever is more convenient to you, and we can talk about it. We can think about something, like prepare some exercise workshops, and who knows, right? Okay. In ideal situations, what I want is we have an alumni in Singapore who at least made it to create a Series A. And we'll never know, right? That's the best marketing for us, right? So we need to make sure that we have to promote that as much as we can, right? So whoever has ideas, let us know. It's an open space. It's all alumni only kind of situations, right? So, who knows, right? So, but yeah, if you're interested to build something, let us know. We can help. Yeah.
Anybody else? You see what's going on in the chat? Anybody posted anything?
Congrats, Wagon. I'm 20 students.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. 10,000 students, man, worldwide. Get it from. It's when you invite somebody who's an UX expert to come to your talk, and then you look at your slides and you're like, damn. There's so many mistakes. We become super aware. Okay, but that's about the shout outs. We're close just on the next meetup. We'll organize it to the end of the next month. We already have organized a workshop with Supabase. So I don't know if you know Firebase, but Supabase is like Firebase, but with open source tools. And they're going to run a workshop on how to do your first open source contributions. So I think it's going to be cool. And I just don't want to have only speakers. I want to have you guys. I want to also people on the other side of the wire. I want everybody to get involved. This is a community space. So if you have anything you've learned, anything you've built, anything you want to talk about, and anything really, just bubble it up. Let Prima know, let me know, let Liana know, and we'll slot you in. Okay. So yeah, but overall, I'm super happy, super excited to have the first meetup. I just would love to have everybody on screen if possible, so we can take a picture.